Apologies for the delay. That was my computer. But welcome to the Fortuna Masterclass that we've called very simply How to Get Into the Stanford GSB. If only it was so simple. This is the third in a series of webinars with my expert admissions colleagues at Fortuna. In previous weeks, we've taken you on a journey to Harvard Business School and to Wharton. Incredibly insightful sessions that are available on Fortuna's YouTube channel. Unmissable if you want to join the MBA classrooms in Boston and Philadelphia. But today, of course, will be about the classroom in Palo Alto. My name is Matt Simmons. I'm one of the co-founders of Fortuna and host of the Center Court MBA Festival with Poets and Quants. My day job involves recordings like this with my extraordinary colleagues. And today is a wonderful example. I'm joined by Maren Savage. Maren is one of our senior expert coaches. She was a former admissions reader at the Stanford GSB and also at Berkeley Haas, and of course, an MBA alum of the Stanford GSB. And with her, Rachel Erickson, he also one of our senior expert coaches and also a Stanford MBA, also a GSB admissions interviewer. She is also, ladies and gentlemen, a Liverpool Football Club fan, riding high on the success of the last season. We'd love to replicate that success for you with your own goals, not about football, but about business school. So over the next hour, we've got a lot to cover, including, of course, the fundamental question, Stanford GSB. Now, that's actually a question that the school asks in the MBA application. We'll be breaking that down and, of course, spending a lot of time on what it is that Stanford looks for. There'll be a deep dive into the GSB essays, that iconic question that we'll be looking at. I'm going to try to keep track of your questions, but forgive me if my mouse plays up and I can't get to the chat. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end. So let's start, I guess, with why Stanford. It's the home of the touchy-feely elective interpersonal dynamics, but so much more. And perhaps, Maren, you can start with your own reflections on why the GSB.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Matt. I mean, when I was there, I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into, but you hit the nail on the head there with that touchy-feely class, and we'll go into this in a lot more detail. But I'd say that, there was a couple things that really stand out to me. One was in those initial introductions, meeting my classmates. Um, there was this, and I'll talk about it later, but a log line. Like there was something that was really powerful and profound about those particular individuals. And this is aside from the schools that they went to, aside from the titles and the companies that they were representing before. And it was really about these individuals, and these individuals were tended to be change makers in whatever space that they were, deeply passionate, deeply intellectually curious about what it is that they were discovering in their own lives, and deeply passionate about their goals. So it was really the individuals themselves. The other thing too that I found particularly refreshing about the GSB is that touchy-feely class and classes that were similar to that. It's synonymous with doing the inner work. In that touchy-feely class, actually, there was a running joke that, if you haven't cried in the class, then you're not doing it right. Right. So are you somebody who's interested in interpersonal relationships and developing those interpersonal relationships in such a manner that you're going to be a giver in this class, a contributor in the classroom? Are you open and vulnerable and authentic to yourself? Are you self-reflective and thoughtful so that you're wide open to this experience? And it starts really with the application, which is really exciting. And we'll go into that as well. Are you the sort of person who can really share yourself and think deeply about who you are? And Rachel, you as an alum as well, I'm curious about the similarities or other things that you.
Yeah. Well, I think you really hit on it. For me, the most important and the most special thing that I remember about the school is the people and the community and the culture and everything from the admissions day when you show up and they have balloons to celebrate people's birthday, whoever's birthday it was that day. And then you get to the school and you realize uh, how positive it is. And it's a very small community. And because of that, you feel like you get to know people really well. And everybody, I think, from the administration through to the faculty, through to the students, values that collaborative culture. And so you have that feeling of warmth and support throughout the school, and it makes it really special. And I mean, even today, when I look at my closest friends, a number of them are from Stanford, and that those relationships that you develop over those 2 years continue to extend over the course of your lifetime. So I think that that personal element is also, in addition to the innovation, the global impact, the leadership development, all of those other things it offers, it gives you that feeling. I do also want to just talk a little bit about the education and give just one example of a class that I think in particular, sorry about that, in particular really exemplifies what Stanford's about. And it's a course called Design for Extreme Affordability. And this is a 2 trimester class that you can take your second year, and it is a joint program that you take with the School of Engineering and with the School of Design students. So you really see that collaboration and interdisciplinary work in practice. And the purpose of this course is to design a product or service that is literally to change the lives of the world's poorest citizens. And you figure out what it is that you need, what problem do you want to tackle, and then you design literally what product you're going to build or what service you're going to build. And then once again, literally, you create prototypes of this product or service. And some past examples of real products that are actually out there today. There's the Miracle Feet Brace, which is for people who have club feet. It's a way to treat it without having surgery. Or D-Light, which is a solar-powered lamp that allows people to replace dangerous kerosene lamps. And you see these are actually just a couple of the many products that are in the world today. And so I think it shows how Stanford, even among their students, they want people to have that impact, and they want to have people to have that impact on a global scale. And I think that that really exemplifies a lot of what the school is about.
Yeah, we talk about a mission or a tagline of changing lives, also organizations and the world. I think the examples that you've given, in terms of a small class, Rachel, for you know, typically 430 students with a big impact. Of course, that makes it very selective. There are often 16, 17, 18 candidates applying for every one place in the classroom, but part of a much bigger Stanford University and this ability to work across different departments. Is that something that you'd want candidates to reflect on when they think about why Stanford?
Yes, I definitely think so. I think there's both the element of if you're interested in learning a little bit more about engineering, maybe you have a coding background, but you want to, develop more skills in that area. I've had former students who have gone on, or former clients who have gone on to take those classes. Or you can do something like take a creative writing class. And develop a completely different set of your skills, or you can really go crazy and you can take a tennis class or a golf class and take advantage of some of the other things that Stanford has to offer. But that interdisciplinary piece, and then also the ability to get those joint degrees, is one of the fantastic things that the school has to offer, is because it does have just such extraordinary programs in so many different areas outside of even just the business school.
Presumably, those tennis classes you can take outside all year round, whereas in Boston you'd have to
Yes.
find an indoor
Oh,
court
yeah.
for some parts of the winter.
Yeah.
Um, I've been very fortunate, a long friendship with Kirsten Moss, the former admissions dean at Stanford GSB. I once asked her the now famous tiramisu question about what Stanford is looking for in candidates. We will find the recording and share it with you viewers. It's an incredibly insightful 4-minute long response. But in terms of what Stanford is looking for, Maren, from your perspective, there's no one thing. It really is trying to get a much better sense of the candidate, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I remember that webinar quite well, and I pass it along to clients all the time. There's this little clip within that where Kristen Moss is talking specifically to what it is that Stanford is really looking for, and we'll go into that in great detail here. But I wanted to take a step back and talk about holistic review just for a moment, because I think it really grounds us in what it is that admissions teams are looking for, right? So GSB practices holistic review. Most schools do. And it's really looking at all aspects of you to make an informed decision about who you are, what drives you, what your background and your values and so on are. So these qualitative pieces, in addition to these more objective measures, I'll call them. So with respect to, test scores, GPA, particular background, as we said before, title, type of company itself, and so on. Sure, those are important to look at, and admissions committees are going to look at those. Those are helpful objective measures. trajectory in your career and so on, but also they're looking for just a big behaviors behind who you are. So as I said before, when I met my classmates, it was more about them as unique individuals than it was about anything prestigious or pedigree related, right? So, and only you know that, right? And only you can draw out those things that you've contributed. So it means that holistic review, we're looking at all of these things to make a whole vision of this person and ask ourselves, can we see them in the classroom as a contributor? For instance, I've had clients in the past talk about how, they're particularly passionate about something and they have a knack for drawing connections faster than most. And those things have and will continue to propel them well in their career. Or, are you raised to show, raised to believe deeply in the importance of human connection, and that really guides how you act in this world and draw partnerships and engage others and so on. I'm making these scenarios up really, but you're getting down to this level of the qualities and the essence of you that drives the behavior and the outcomes, and then talking about the outcomes and that real hard-hitting evidence that's going to be meaningful, right? But first, it starts with the individual, and that takes quite a bit of brainstorming and working with a coach.
Presumably, Rachel, nobody walks around the campus, the farm, as we call it, with a T-shirt that says, I got 780 on the GMAT. It's about the individual and not the test score. With a lot of the events that we host with members of the admissions team at Stanford, we talk a lot about patterns of behavior and the idea, whether professionally, perhaps during your studies or in the community, certain qualities, characteristics, whether it's impact, leadership, analytical thinking, supporting others. It's something that the admissions loves to be able to identify, and how these patterns perhaps find a place in so many different chapters of your life.
Yes, very much. I mean, I think that the saying is past behavior predicts what you're going to do in the future. So they are looking for both patterns that show what your qualities are, your leadership potential, your ability to excel in a variety of situations, your ability to deal with things that are hard and challenging, so that they see that resilience and all of the things that they're looking for. And I think Marin is going to talk a little bit more about this, but I wanted to just also mention one of the things she talked about with that holistic review is that I think people sometimes do feel like there's a checklist for business school, and I need this GPA and I need this test score and I need this type of work experience, and then I'll get in. And what I want to remind people is that all of these pieces are kind of moving parts, and that one person may have extraordinary work experience, but like their GPA is just fine and they're still an incredible applicant. Somebody else, maybe their extracurriculars are what are just unbelievably compelling about them. Somebody else, it might be their, their background and their history and some of the stuff that they've done in their personal life. And it really is, it's not like there's certain things that get you in. It's looking at that, once again, that pattern overall, and sort of looking for the things that stand out and are really exceptional. So that is one thing sometimes people are like, well, I'm a little weak in this one area. And that holistic review means that if you are also great in a different area, it doesn't matter, because they see that pattern of having really performed and having really done things that show the potential they're looking for.
Right, now, we're already getting some great questions coming in, including one on intellectual vitality. I'm going to wait to the next slide, but I would just like to come to this idea of a sense of purpose, Marin. The idea of spending 2 years at the GSB, exploring, looking at new opportunities and perhaps taking your life in whole new different ways. But that's very different. It's a sense of purpose is not, I intend to become a VP in financial services. What is it that we're describing when we talk about purpose?
Yeah, I think the sense of purpose can mean a number of different things. So I'll take it from two angles. One is, yes, I think that purpose in more of like the explicit sense, right? We're lining yourself with something that is related to a common good, a good for all, raising up other people, making a better space for others to develop. having a kind of more of a social cause, right? There's like this kind of explicit purpose. But then there's others who can show through their patterns of behavior this purposeful or intentionality about what it is that they're doing, right? So strong sense of purpose and direction for me says, and I get a lot of clients who are like this. You're sort of moving throughout your roles, your what it is that you're doing. But if you can show me that you're guided by something, there's some intentionality in what you're taking away from your role, and then you're iterating back and investing that whatever it is that you've learned, right? That's also intellectual curiosity, right? If you're learning from your experiences and you're showing me that you're building upon that towards some sort of purposeful direction, well, then I feel like, you're showing yourself to be somebody who is, guided by a vision, who has kind of the self-reflective practices and thoughtfulness that says that I'm carving my own path, and I could bring together all of the information that I've learned from other people or from being on the job, and it's feeding back into what it is that I'm doing next. Right. So you're showing intellectual curiosity by saying, okay, well, what's next? I'm always hungry for that next thing. And I'm iterating on my learning, and I'm always up leveling. Right. It doesn't necessarily have to show itself in an objective trajectory per se. We understand that people have different paths and you move around. But can you show me a sense of purpose and direction that really helps me understand that it's not you're going this direction and you're saying, no, that's not for me. I'm going this direction. No, that's not for me. But it's more of a guided path and some intentionality and thoughtfulness.
Right. So
Yeah, I just wanted, oh,
please do.
sorry. I just wanted to jump in and say on that people think, oh no, I have to write about my purpose. I have to write about my calling of, sort of how am I going to save the world? And I think you can take a step back, and your purpose can just be doing what you love, what you're good at, what you enjoy, and knowing what that is. So maybe you love cars and you want to go work for an automotive industry. And maybe you're not going to be the person that invents electric cars, but you're going to be the person that helps a legacy automotive company deal with the changes in this industry and safely navigate it through how things do evolve. Like, that is an incredible purpose, but it doesn't have to be about, it doesn't have to be purely altruistic. It can also just be tied to your passions, your interests, what matters to you.
And a great example with
Client.
the CEO of
Sorry.
General Motors, right?
I'm just thinking of,
I have a client that comes to mind, and it's about this slide as well, Matt, but I have a client that comes to mind, and he works for a tech startup in logistics. So this is like the United States Postal Office 2.0. I mean, it's so snoozy. There's nothing wow about that at all. But he fundamentally changed the way that they operated. And going through that and hearing, and he's very kind of sheepish about, the place that he works, right? But we're listening to what he's done there, and I'm like, that's wow, and that's you, and you've got to own that. He didn't think it was wow. He's just like, well, I'm doing these things, but in our conversations, it's like, that is really wow. And then we go through other pieces of his life, and there was similarly that sort of quality where I can move this person over here to this company or this company or this company, and he's going to drive that change. And that's phenomenal. That's exactly who you want to have as a contributor. This is lower tier school, no name or company, snoozy industry, right? But that's the sort of person that you want. He just has this fire in him, and that itself is purposeful and showing passion and determination and grit and resilience and all those things that were on that slide.
Well, it's a great example that there's no one resume, there's no one feeder school, there's no one employer. And for all of our viewers, I'd love to draw your attention to the deep dives that we do for Stanford, Harvard, Wharton every couple of years. We look to go beyond the sort of the headlines of the schools publish their incoming class, and you find out the percentage of international students, average test scores, GPA, 90% came from consulting. So in our deep dives, we managed to capture close to 90% of each class. The Stanford ones published just a couple of months ago. where we look at where people studied, what they studied, and then the career trajectory as they headed towards business school. But as both of my panelists have reminded us, it's not a checklist and it's not one job title. We'll be spending some time on that on the theme of leadership. But in terms of academics and professional background, Rachel, a few of your thoughts about the diversity that Stanford is bringing together and crafting with each class.
Um, yes, I mean, I think you say it, and we've been talking about this, that there isn't one background or one path. It's not, oh, consultants. Yes, there are a lot of consultants who end up at business school, but so many of them did something after consulting that was more closely related to their long-term career interests. Same finance. There are a lot of people maybe who do come from finance, but they came from all different areas in finance. They may not want to stay in finance. And once again, they may have come from an Ivy League school, or they may have gotten their start in finance in a very different background and a very different world, and then worked their way into a position. And business schools work when you have that richness of diversity, the richness of thought, the richness of experiences, the richness of backgrounds. So yeah, there is they need the humanities majors in addition to the computer science majors, in addition to the business majors, to make the school what it is. And I mean, we see this all the time. People come in and they'll be like, oh, my background is this. And I'm like, that's amazing. They're going to be so excited to see somebody with your background come across because, they want that. So I think that is something really to keep in mind.
Well, you've just beautifully answered the question that Supriyo had put to us in terms of it was actually professors with students and whether you've got a humanities or a policy background as perhaps opposed to finance consulting, there's a voice, finding your voice in admission. So I suppose, again, Maren, that reinforces this idea of the path that you've taken, that growth trajectory that we describe, is much more than the company that you might be working for, and this idea of blue chip. The admissions office is taking a much deeper dive to understand the path you've taken.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in holistic review, you are looking more often, I can't look at a resume and a lot of times I look at the resume and I see the results of what you've done, right? The Stanford application is the way it is, and it's awfully robust, and it's got a word count like you wouldn't believe. But the reason is because they really want to understand how you operate. We want to see, I want to walk in your shoes and see how you are individually a high performer. So I see the trajectory in terms of, your promotions and so on. But tell me about behaviorally, what did you do in order to earn that? And that's far more important to me, especially when I'm open to a number of different industries and backgrounds, right? I'm not always going to have this clean matchup. Maybe in consulting, private equity, investment banking, so the things of that nature, I could see more objectively, line people up and understand who's a star. But if I'm a school, as they are, that says, well, I actually really love people who have philosophy backgrounds, you can't cleanly measure that person. You have to look at the behavior. And that's the sort of person I think becomes a little bit more agnostic to industry going forward, right? If you can show me that you're somebody who can deeply problem solve, you're getting down to these like fundamental levels of behavior, then I can pluck you out of here and I can put you over here. And I know that you'll still shine because you have you just have this ability to think through things, problem solve, work with others, engage others, and so on and so forth. But I want to know what that means for you, because there are different flavors of that, which I think we'll get into.
Now, I think that we all agreed that we could probably spend half of today's masterclass just on this theme of demonstrating leadership. It picks up again, Rachel, on this idea of influence and not a job title, which can be perhaps limiting in what it captures. So how would you approach this? What is it that when you're working with clients, you're looking to capture and share?
So I think first and foremost is leadership is not how many people you manage. Leadership is how you change the organizations that you are involved with for the better. And The how is really, really important there too. They want to know not just what you did to make this better, but why were you successful? What is your leadership style? How do you influence people? You know, how do you work with people? How do you develop insights and synthesize information and come up with creative solutions? All of those things together. Showing that's really like making your case for why you have the accomplishments to be at Stanford.
Hmm. This idea, perhaps, Maren, of, well, Stanford's such a collaborative place. Shouldn't I just show that I was a member of a team? We're also ensuring that you, as the individual, are able to demonstrate your impact in that team, right? There is an I in there as well.
Yes, there is certainly a big I in there. And it's the I that I want to understand and be able to see in a team at school and then beyond. So, and I could tell you, I feel like we have to go down into the nuances of things because I want you to be able to understand fully the different varieties of I there is. And I can tell you from working with so many clients, nobody nobody is able to get to that so far. I don't know, objectively on their own. So there's a term called spikiness in admissions, and really that's just kind of your superpower, right? So some people, are very good at seeing outside the status quo, who are able to go in there and see a problem for what it is in this white space and identify the trajectory that we should go on, identify the idea, identify that kind of that change that's going to matter, right? They come into a company that maybe has quite a bit of status quo. It's a bit of a bureaucratic space. They're like, well, why do we do things the way that we do? And can we do them differently, right? So there's people who are very good at that. There's people who are very good at engaging others, the big coalitions of change to see their way see their vision and leading others to this common end. There are some people who can just really execute well and drive results broader and further than most. And then there are other people who just deeply, deeply invest in others, and not just in the person to person sense, but also in the manner in which they create more efficient spaces for people to be able to develop well on their own, right? There are all these different flavors of who you are. And if you could attach that for me as a reader to something that is authentically you have your story, you have this evidence of this of demonstrated leadership in a variety of different spaces, and you can get down to that granular level of this is how I'm effective exactly, and giving me those examples of how you led that change. What is your unique contribution to that team? Then I can start to understand how you are going to be successful in other places. So I have a lot of people who, there's common pitfalls, right? A lot of people who come in, I see a lot of private equity folks just because that's been my former career, right? And I always ask them, so, but just ask yourself, so what? Like a lot of people come in and say, well, I'm the best financial modeler there is. I can optimize the capital table like no other, faster, whatever. And I asked, but so what, right? So what's the big idea with that? What's transferable to me as a layperson? Can you map that to real business outcomes? Can you make that come alive in that sense so that I understand, why that matters, right? And then the other thing that is a common pitfall that I ask people to go into this deeper level, as there's been saying, is don't focus on just the results themselves. Like I see that in the resume, but I want to see the entirety of your examples. A lot of times people start with what you did, like the action, without going further back into the past and saying, well, what was that initial spark? What was that initial idea? What did you see that uncovered that pathway? Start there. And then don't stop at the results either. I want you to expand on, is that problem that you solved, or that solution you came up with, has it been sticky? Does it have real staying power? How wide has it spread since then? How many lives have it touched? Has it gone across the organization? Was it shared with other teams? These are things that problems that you solved, solutions that you came with that had to do with people, had to do with organizations and efficiency and so on. But really, I want you to stretch that out so I feel I understand fully the magnitude and the full context of it.
I
This, I
just
think, for
couldn't, sorry, I was
leadership,
just gonna say, I
Rachel.
couldn't agree more. The how did you do this is something that I always stress, and the context, so important. And so many people with, when they just sort of do the first draft, don't understand how to bring that how and that context to what they're writing. And without that, the reader just doesn't understand why it's so important and why it matters.
And also, Rachel, that candidates feel they should just layer one success on top of another and present this perfect picture. And yet, Stanford, certainly through recommenders, very deliberately wants to see how you've learned from an experience and the idea of learning from feedback. That's something that will give them a lot of insight about you as a candidate.
Yes, once again, it's that understanding of growth, and they want people. I think Stanford fundamentally believes that if you are a self-aware, reflective person, you are going to be able to go farther and grow more and gain more from the GSB experience than if you're somebody who just kind of lets, everything roll off your back. And so they are looking for people who are able to apply that introspection in the application, because then they know that this is somebody who will be able to apply that introspection in business school and throughout their career to figure out, oh, I need to course correct here. I need to learn this. I'm maybe not great at that, but I am really good at this. So maybe I should move in this direction and test myself in this way. And I think that once again, these are the things that they're looking for to see what you are going to be able to do with your life and your career.
Hosting the Stanford admissions director at an event at the NASDAQ Center in San Francisco, the first thing that they shared with an audience of 450 associates, consultants, software engineers, they said, I think Stanford's GMAT average is too high. I was looking at the audience and I'd rarely seen 450 jaws all drop at the same time. But they then went on to explain that nuance, that depth and texture that both of you have touched upon. And I suppose it speaks to our first point here, Maren, that you as an individual are far more than your grades and your test scores. It matters. They look for that academic horsepower, but part of the picture. How do you frame that intellectual vitality?
Yeah, unfortunately, Stanford has the application is so robust and I love it. You do have the ability in that application to really stretch out. I want to walk in your shoes as we've been talking about it, but I also want to see the inner workings of your brain. And I want it to be in a way that I have a clear understanding of how you operate, how you iterate on knowledge, right? When you hit a barrier or a challenge, are you somebody who's going to think in a growth-minded sense and investigate that more fully to better understand what the other paths are? Are you thinking about the problem in a critical way that allows you to dissect it and choose a path that's best? Do you also seek, resources and input from others? And show me all the different ways that you have done that. Are you sort of person who's going to ask, well, why can't we do it this way? Do you stop and think that way? And a lot of times that creates that spark that then drives this change that we've been talking about. So yeah,
Right.
intellectual vitality is really is super important, and there was a way to show that not just in your grades and your test score, but more in how it is that you act and behave.
Rachel, you've conducted many, many GSB interviews with candidates, so they're already at that final stage. And perhaps, in contrast to Harvard Business School that has their 30-minute interview, it's always 30 minutes, no more. The Stanford interview could run for an hour and a half, perhaps. And I imagine that within that, you are then able to get that sense of curiosity of a person that thinks about how the world works.
Yeah, I mean, I actually love the Stanford interview because you go so in depth with the applicant. You might just ask them one question as sort of as a starter question for the entire thing, but then you are going to drill down with a million follow-on questions so that you understand everything about their work experience. So you tell me what you did. Okay, well, how did you do this? Wait, what did that person say? How did they get on board? How did you get them on board? Why did you notice this was a problem? And that's to that intellectual vitality once again. And then what did you think was the right solution? And then maybe even asking them to take a step back and think about strategically their company or their industry and what are some of the issues that are going on or in their department. And so you learn so much about what they did, how they did it, and then also how they think about what they did. And it really gives applicants, I think, a chance to showcase their best selves, both intellectually and strategically, and then also in terms of what they've been able to accomplish.
With GMAT scores that are valid for 5 years, we're still currently talking about the old GMAT averages that have touched as high as 738, certainly above 730. One of our viewers has asked about the new focus scores, where we're probably looking at 685 to 695, but we haven't yet had the dominant number of focus test takers, I think, for Stanford to be able to share that data point. So just one final question on this slide for you, Maren. When it comes to 3 or 4 years of your undergraduate studies, and of course, perhaps for at least a quarter of the applicants going on to grad school, when you weigh that up versus 2.5 hours of a standard test, does one weigh more than the other?
I mean, it's holistic review, so I would never draw these bright lines, right? I think I think at the end of the day, the first year in the program is quantitatively rigorous. So the question is, and it's the test score, there's also the transcripts, but there's also the work that you do, which is quite meaningful too. And a lot of people don't think about bringing that into their story, but it's, can you handle this rigor? You're drinking from a fire hose. You don't just have the classwork, but you also want to be a contributor outside of that. So you're going to spend an awful lot of time in these extra things that you do. So do you just demonstrate a good handle of the material and your ability to do that? Now, I use the additional information section of the application quite a bit to expand on things, right? And I would explain how I was equipped to handle a quantitative rigorous program. I'll be the first to admit that my test score was not great, despite my best efforts, and they still let me in. So I think it's the totality of things under holistic review, and can you just convince me through your words and through showing all these different ways that you've expressed your ability to handle a quantitatively rigorous program.
Right. And once they've got that demonstration that you're going to thrive in the classroom, of course, they might then start to think about the qualities, characteristics, the ideas, the engagement, that's so much part of this business school experience. So as we think about some of those qualities, Rachel, and I also think about values, I'm not sure that running your Stanford essay through ChatGPT is going to really capture the nuance and the granularity of values. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just first of all want to say something about ChatGPT, which is literally the one thing in the world that ChatGPT is most poorly designed to write is a business school applications essay. I think even they've asked ChatGPT, what is the hardest thing to write? And it's introspective personal essays about you. ChatGPT can't do that because they don't know you. And so I do want to make that clear. And then what I would say secondly is that the business school essay is really about getting to know who you are, and it is showing what drives you, what your passions are, what you care about, and then also those values. And I think you can see here the self-awareness, that reflection, that authenticity. They don't want fake, phony, insincere people who glad hand everybody as they walk in the door. They're looking for somebody beyond that. And once again, they don't want somebody who only cares about titles and who only cares about how successful they are. They want somebody who actually cares about the work that they're doing and cares about the impact that that work has. They don't want somebody, once again, to the point I was making earlier, who only thinks about, sort of what they're good at and can't acknowledge where they need to grow and get better, because those people don't end up having the best careers over the course of their lifetime. Uh, and then also that back to that chat GPT, the way that they want you to demonstrate all of these things is with examples and stories from your life. There's a saying in writing, and particularly in business school essay writing, which is show, don't tell. Do not tell me how much you care about, helping your community. Write a story about a time when you did that, and then let us infer that you care about helping your community. So that's incredibly important to keep in mind, is it's those stories and those examples that provide the evidence that you really are who you say you are, not the words that you use to describe yourself.
Right. And Marin, you were talking earlier about spikiness, or the idea of superpowers. And we've identified vulnerability and where that can be a strength, perhaps not a superpower, but a strength, and not a weakness. If you could just talk about this idea of your authentic self and why that works.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, are you a learning and growing person, right? Business school is like nothing else, where you're kind of thrown into the pits with a demanding schedule, and then this close group of your new best friends, who are going to push you, to think differently and to grow and learn from both them, the classroom, outside the classroom, and so on. And you're going to be sleepless and it's going to be ugly, right? But are you going to be vulnerable through this experience? Are you going to be open to change? You're going to hear things about, your leadership, who you are, how you present yourself, that you ordinarily wouldn't get. You're going to get very direct feedback. Are you open to that? Can you receive it? And can you learn from that? And then also, can you be a contributor in the sense that you are a sharing person as well, right? So that is shown a lot in that essay. You also get sprinklings of it from your recommenders, in the sense that there is that question about getting feedback and what do they do about it? Are you somebody who shuts down, or are you somebody who thinks, how can I, how can I develop my own self? What does this mean for me? And how can I show up and do better?
Right. Now, if you're capturing this Fortuna Masterclass on YouTube, I encourage you, just before we move on, to hit pause. This slide, I think, embodies so much of the work that Rachel, Marin, and the rest of our colleagues at Fortuna, that the mirror that they're holding up. Did you do something because it looked good, or because you really believed in it? And so on these 5 points, as you're taking this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to dive into the Stanford application and the self-reflection that is involved, hold up that application to this mirror, because I think it really captures the sort of insight that we're then bringing to find your personal voice. Okay, so where are we going to move now? I think beyond work and those job titles, and beyond your studies, of course, all of those other passions, interests, and we know that your industry, they might have you working very long hours. But there's no timeline on this, right, Rachel, in terms of extracurriculars, things you could have even started in high school that are still relevant and important to you today. What would you emphasize here?
Once again, I'd say you want to focus on the things that really matter to you and that show who you are. And if those are things where you've also had an impact and where you have been able to change things for the better or make a difference, even better. But once again, the person who, if you start doing something just because you feel like you should for your business school application, that's really different from doing something because this is what you care about. Or if you do start doing it because you feel like you need to for your business school application, you need to think really hard about, well, what maybe then have you actually gained from it? What have you learned? What surprised you? What maybe made it then become something that really was meaningful, so that it does resonate in that deeper way, and how it connects to other things in your life that you like, that you enjoy, that you do care about. So I think that, and then once again, usually we suggest focusing on college or later, but if you had incredible sort of extracurriculars in college and you were really a leader, write about them. If you've been a contributor at work, write, and you actually are a big part of creating the office culture at your firm, write about that. Or even totally personal passions, like maybe you're a photographer, or you make films or you write poetry on the side, that can be valid, and really important. Athletics, even if you don't do it in college, but you just do it for fun, also something that you're maybe really serious about. You love triathlons, you really just love challenging yourself. It's shaping that picture of you and your personality and who you are, because the person who wants to run a triathlon is a different person than the person who wants to take a ballet class. And they're both wonderful and they're both rich and they both have meaning, but it's which one do you want, which one will you be in that Stanford GSB class?
Right. Our Fortuna viewers, they all know, Maren, that I talk to candidates on New Year's Eve, 3, 4, 5 days before round 2 deadlines. And every year, often an investment banker that says, tomorrow the financial markets are closed. Tomorrow I'm going to go and volunteer somewhere. I always suggest walking puppies, but simply for the personal pleasure of walking puppies. To pick up on Rachel's point, it's not to overstuff this and this and this. Again, less can be more, because then you can really bring out the substance of that commitment that you've made to yourself and perhaps to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Rachel really hit upon it. It's, there we tend to think of extracurriculars as these formal things that we do. We oftentimes get people who are, and it's absolutely the reality of working your full-time job, is that you don't have a ton of time. But I've had clients consider just the myriad of ways that they contribute outside their formal responsibilities. It could be in work. Maybe you're somebody who invests heavily in junior staff, or you're the person who initiates all these great, team outings or so on, but it's not within your formal responsibilities. So draw those lines first, start there. I think that's the easiest to kind of tick off. Maybe you're somebody who's kind of, you grew up marginalized, and so you're very in tune with the outsider perspective. And so you make it a point to ensure that everybody's voice is included and heard. But it's not anything that's a formal title per se, but let's talk about that, right? Because that's something that's that kind of extra essence of you. I've had people, who they have church groups that are very meaningful to them. They started a meetup outside, and it doesn't, it's reflective of just a personal passion, or maybe you're a writer or a blogger or something like that. So I just think broadly in those early hours of brainstorming with a coach. Nothing is really off the table for that, as long as it's reflective of something that you're actually interested in, and not just doing it, as Rachel said, for the sake of an application.
Right. Rachel, you shared your Stanford MBA experience with Derek Bolton, a former Associate Dean of Admissions, who came up 21 years ago with the iconic question, what matters most to you and why? And I don't know if you ever had, the two of you had a conversation together that may have been a catalyst for a fantastic question that stood the test of time. Why it's so important to Stanford, and they've stayed with it for over 2 decades.
So I think you need to think of this essay as the heart of your story. It's the piece that makes all of the other things that you've done kind of make sense, either explicitly or implicitly. So you don't need to tie it to all the other things in your application. But when they read this, they then should have this core understanding of, oh, this is who this person is. This is what they're like. This is what they love. This is what drives them. This is why they're excited, what their personality is, what their background is. And then everything else should at least make sense given that story. And so I think that's one of the things to really think about, that this essay, you can talk about work in it, but if you do, you need to be very careful that you're not talking about the accomplishments, because there are other places in the Stanford Business School essay where you are supposed to talk about that, and they do not want to hear that here. This is the why, the how, the who you are. So maybe who you are is a work-related story, but it needs to be describing who you are, not, oh, look at all the great things that I've done. And then another thing I'm going to say is that when you're looking at this essay, a lot of times people talk about their past and how it shaped them. And they spend too much time focused on how the past shaped them and what happened to them, and not enough time on what they do and who they are as a result. So if you're thinking about that ratio, look at that essay and a third or a quarter should be the stuff that happened to you that made you who you are. And then the next three quarters or two thirds needs to be you and how you show up in the world as a result of those things. Yeah, just really also don't be afraid to show vulnerability with this essay. Um, think about the introspection. This is not where you impress people. This is where you get them to know you.
Right. We talk, Maren, a lot about the journey, the partnership that we have with our clients at Fortuna on this road to business school. And the application, of course, is a step towards securing the interview. If anybody ever told me that they were passionate about golden retrievers and Venezuelan chocolate, I'd probably want to meet them. Have you ever read, among the many what matters most to you and why essays, have you ever read an essay and sort of almost overlooked everything else? I know that it's holistic and said, would be really interested to meet this person.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. Here's how having read like thousands of these essays, right? The applications in general. There's a couple things that come to mind. The first thing is oftentimes by the time you get to the essay, you have a very good sense for who that person is. And that essay really sinks it. It gives it good legs, right? It makes it super, super sticky in my mind and my heart. And that's when you know that you've done your job right. Right. So when you think about the application, you get an awful lot around your background, what school you went to. I could sort of start to think about and envision how you made your choices, what major you chose, where you grew up, what sort of, your parents and what they did. And so I could kind of start to visualize things a little bit. And then we move to your extracurriculars. How did you show up? What kind of leadership positions did you take? Did you or did you not? Or were you more of like the researcher sort of person? Or did you work a whole lot? Or that gives me a whole other indication. So you're kind of building this story already about who this person is, and you're moving to work. And I'm like, oh, there's great trajectory, or maybe you bounced around, maybe you gathered these skills, and there's places where you can say, why it is that you joined this place, or what were your key accomplishments there? And I'm really getting a sense for who this person is, as we've been talking about. I want to be able to walk in your shoes. I want to see how you made these decisions. And you want to use that application to really spell that sort of stuff out. Show me intentionality, show me purpose, show me what you learned and what you brought to the next place and how you iterated. And then by the time I get to these essays, it's give me that rich context about who you are that really drives it all home for me. It puts the little bow on the package for me so that I can fully understand who you are, where you came from, and how you're going to be. And then we'll talk about SAB later, but then SAB is like, oh, whoa, where are you going to go, right? So I'm catching you at your peak, right? You're showing me this growth, and I'm catching you at your peak, plus the resources at this business school, and you're on your way clearly. So that's what I want. That's what I want to feel. What that looks like comes in a number of different flavors. And we have this great at Fortuna. We do these great strategy kickoff calls, and I just love them to death because that's what we're gunning for. Is really we got to go down layers, and it's really hard when you're going through that to know that that's what you're doing. But when you're with a coach and they're mirroring back to you and they're saying, oh, this sounds like there's a common thread here, or this sounds really interesting. Is this how you think? Then it starts to click. Then it hit home in terms of, okay, no, that is true in terms of how I guide myself and how I decide and how I behave. So I've had, clients in the past who, they've had real challenge growing up, and that piqued a passion, and that becomes quite clear in that what matters most and why. And then I've had others who really didn't have challenge, but it was the conversations around the dinner table when they were growing up, or maybe they're multi-generational family and they observed grandparents going through something, or all of these different things kind of come together in that what matters most to you and why essay.
You remind me of the adage, we might forget the where and the when, but we never forget how it made us feel. And just from the cadence of your voice, from you talk about mind and heart. You remind me just what a deeply human and personal approach this is, and the joy that admissions officers get as they're looking to admit candidates. Perhaps just a very practical question, Rachel, for a reapplicant. One of our viewers has asked advice for reapplicants approaching this essay, but perhaps the fundamentals really haven't changed. I mean, you'd certainly be able to look at an essay and see if it's capturing the sort of advice that both of you have shared. But typically, what's your advice to a reapplicant as they come back to this essay?
So they need to have a new essay, but whether that essay is on a completely different topic or on the same topic, but with a slightly more nuanced or more reflective approach with the benefit of extra time, kind of depends. I've seen some people where their original essay was really their life story. And so going forward, it's still going to be their life story, but maybe they think a little bit more about what the conclusions are or how it connects to what they want to do next. Whereas somebody else, maybe they wrote an essay that was a particular incident, a time they went rock climbing and a really, sort of life-defining experience they had maybe with a challenge during that. And then this time, maybe they love the adrenaline of the rock climbing. So maybe they talk about that excitement and that joy, but they show it in a different way, with a different profession. And maybe in their work experience. Hang on, I'm just gonna put myself on mute for a second while I try and stop the noise that's
Well, okay, and perhaps we'll just wrap this one up, Maren. But I mean, in either case, a lot of thought, and then that spills over to the next essay about why Stanford. We'd started this masterclass by thinking of some of the personality and culture of the school. Now we have 350 words. Is it filling paragraph 8 and 9 with all the electives you want to take? I mean, I could probably cut and paste that in 3 minutes, right?
Yeah. Going back to what we were talking about before in terms of the background in the application really leads up to this SAA, and the SAA really gives us legs. SAB is an invitation to show me, okay, what are you going to do with this? And I want, I feel like when I know that it's really working is when I feel this sense of urgency in SAB with respect to I'm at this kind of juncture, right? I've driven this as far as I can. I've done all that I can. I want you to convince me of that. That this is the exact right time. And the way that you do that is you should do this for yourself. It's a big investment of time and money, right? So really understand what you're getting with this program and ask a lot of people and do the research and look at the curriculum and look at the outcomes and so on, and really ask yourself, is this really what I want in my life? It's a big, big, big undertaking, right? As you're doing that, then you can think about, how just where I'm coming from, and then my goals at the end of this, can I map the program to meet those expectations? What am I really lacking, right? So there's kind of this like gaps analysis. I have my dream on the other side. I'm here, but I know that I have this work to do. And then, what in this program is uniquely important for me to have and obtain? And what am I going to really do with this? Now, of course, you haven't gone through the program, so you're not going to really have the answers, but that's why you talk to alum. That's why you talk to students. If you have those people in your disposal, you do your research, you do the webinars, you talk to a coach, but that's the story, really that I want to hear, at a good level of specificity, because it should be very
Rachel,
personal to you.
yeah. Rachel, you'll often work with clients that are perhaps applying to 2, 3, 4 schools. Can you tell when a response like this, truly speaks to this institution? There's that sense of alignment and the culture.
So I'm actually going to say I think it's more important that you use this essay to show that you understand where you need to grow from business school than perhaps the specific school, because there are some things, these schools are all great programs. They all have a lot in common. And I think at the end of the day, A business school is much more interested in knowing, for example, you had this experience, you were in this situation, and maybe you lacked this particular skill, and you saw somebody who was a manager who did have an MBA and how well they were able to navigate it. And you want to develop that skill because you're going to need it in your future profession. Um, the fact that it's Stanford versus Wharton versus whatever other business school, I think is actually a touch less important to the school than the fact that you know so clearly what it is that you need. I also think it makes it more interesting to the reader if you're telling them something interesting and new about you and your work experience, that like,
Mm.
oh, you didn't understand that this you're thinking about, 2-year timeline, and meanwhile the founder of this company is saying no, I'm thinking about, the next 3 weeks and, what's going on then. And like, oh, I need to shape my perspective and maybe get entrepreneurial experience. That is something you can get at a bunch of different schools. Um, so focus more on the where you need to grow and where you need to learn, and worry a little bit less about making sure that you show the school. And also, just this is a one thing, is keep in mind that the business schools know the courses, and when you spend any of your precious words describing the course that you are going to take, it's really kind of a waste of time, because you're telling them something they already know. Find a way to tell them something that they don't know.
Right. Now, from the way that we frame this, optional essays implies that these are not a waste of time. Maren, is an essay optional? Again, another great opportunity to share, whether it's impact or influences in your life.
Yeah, it's absolutely a great opportunity. So the three positive impact essays that are relatively new relative to the SAA, What Matters Most and Why. But really, it was as we've talked, throughout this webinar, it's about wanting to fully understand how this person operates, right? So everybody has different definitions of what impact means to them. But I wanted to understand from your definition of impact, or your version of impact, what did you touch? How did you change things? How did they contribute to the communities, the companies around you? And then how far reaching were they? Right. So this is the, 3 really great opportunities to have me walk in your shoes. And I want you to, I think, I read a lot of first drafts, and a lot of first drafts talk about, well, the team did this, and then again focuses on just kind of the results. And I want to understand remember that inner workings of your brain, right? Your own intellectual vitality, your own curiosity, what piqued your interest, how did you problem solve? Where were you in this conversation, those early conversations that sparked this direction? And then what sort of contributor were you? Did you get feedback? Did you learn? So on and so forth. So walk me through that from really your point of view, because that's the piece that's going to be transportable to school and then, and beyond.
Right. And as we've said, Rachel, it's not like, oh, I think I told you about this, but I really just want to come back to it because it's so important to me. They may have already got that, whether it's from the resume, whether it's from one of the other essays or the voice of a recommender. So you don't then need to go back to stories that you've already shared.
Yes and no. Sometimes it's that you're telling a story that you don't necessarily know what your recommender is writing about. So you might share it, the same story, but it needs to be from your perspective. It needs to be very different from your perspective. And once again, I think we talked about this earlier, but one of the things that you want to do with these essays is this is where you can give the context. And we talked about how you need to make this something that a layperson can understand, even if they have no knowledge of your industry. Because if you're one of the applicants who is going to be accepted, you're not going to just be read by one person. You're going to be read by a variety of people, from a range of backgrounds. So you need to make very clear what the problem is that you're trying to solve, why it mattered to your organization, what you personally did to change things and how you changed them, and then finally what the impact was. And so really tying all of those pieces together and giving that additional context means that even if it's something that's on your resume, you don't want to repeat yourself, but you can discuss the same the same incident or experience, but just with much more context, much more richness, and more depth than, and a different perspective than you might otherwise.
Over the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've seen applications to business school get so much shorter. So, oh, well, Gen Z, they won't have the attention span. I love the fact that Stanford has brought these in. I think it speaks to Aaron Nixon and Will Torres and the rest of the admissions team really caring about their work and getting to know you as candidates.
I do
Hence,
want to just say that, in my opinion, I think these are actually, they may not take as much time as the main essays, but I think they're as important as the main essays.
Every piece counts. So as we come to any final advice for our viewers, the Fortuna Admissions Knowledge Center, we have this sort of insight, this guidance that Rachel and Maren have been sharing with us, other videos that break down all of these different pieces of the puzzle. So perhaps just respectful also of everybody's time as we close out in the next 5 minutes. Any overriding final piece of advice, or perhaps even simply words of encouragement, not to talk yourself out of applying to Stanford? Maren, what would you lead with?
Put in that initial work to do that brainstorming to really pull out the essence of you first. You don't want to write your application and then come back to it and try to, tighten things up. It really benefits you to do it up front to get a very clear understanding of what your path is and then execute accordingly. You want to get down to that level of introspection and authenticity to be able to pull this off well. And it starts from that introspection and getting in touch with who you are uniquely and authentically.
Right. Rachel, what would you add?
Yeah, so I'm just going to add two things on that path. The one thing I will say is that if you are writing what you think the admissions committee wants to hear and not what you really think, 100% it shows. They read so many of these. Any insincerity, any sort of element that isn't really thoughtful, it just stands out like a sore thumb. And you got to be really careful about every word you write, that it is absolutely 100% true to you and your voice, and just put what you think the admissions committee wants to hear out of your mind. And then the other thing I'm going to say is that people always say, well, I've done this and this is going to what's going to make me unique and get me in. And I'm just going to say there is almost nothing that somebody has gone through in terms of their job experience, their extracurriculars, their academics, or their background even, that is so unique that it's going to be what gets you in. What's going to make your application unique is the combination of all of the things that make you you. The only thing that is unique is that richness of your personality. So if you put together an application that you read it and you're like, I don't know whether this is what's going to get me in, but this application is 100% who I am and it has captured who I am on paper, then that's going to be a unique application. And I also think that those are very often the most compelling applications. So maybe put that as your goal instead of anything else, is just to really capture who you are and what you have done in that application.
Right. Well, let me say something that's true to myself. Both of you illustrate a comment that I made at the beginning of why I love my day job. I get to spend this time with both of you, and it just fills me with so much positivity, so much hope. Candidates, they reach out to us and say, well, is my story distinct enough? Or, I have a less traditional background. How's that going to stand against me? And I think both of you embody this idea of possibility, being the very best you. And we multiply that not just across Stanford, but across all of the world's top business schools. It's a quite extraordinary, I refer to them as the dream team. And it's this level of guidance, this level of insight and unbiased feedback. Now that starts with our first free consultation together. We take the time to look through your resume, your background, so that discussion really centers on you, your next steps, where business school fits in, and all of the things that you want to discuss about that journey. So please sign up. People say it is simply the best phone phone call in the industry to get you started. And as I say, with Maren, with other colleagues, we tend spend a lot of time devoted to those calls. So Q&A, I think just at this point, there's maybe just one or two questions. I'm going to, if I can, stop sharing the screen because I want to pull up some of the final questions that have come in. Learning Spanish in the past year, would it be useful to have my recommender mention that, or maybe something that goes on the resume? Where would you show your linguistic curiosity? Perhaps you've learned to code. There's so many things that you could be doing in your spare time. Maren, what do you think?
It's a great question, and I would follow it up with I need to learn more about you. Is that something that's really deeply, piece of who you are? Is linguistics your thing? Was that your is this kind of like language is part of like how you experience the world? Is there something bigger to that? Or, is it just part of like your intellectual curiosity? So is it something that's expansive and flexible that we can, expand on? And is it really part of your story? Or is it something that is kind of more of just a sound bite, something that makes it interesting and shows some intellectual curiosity? Then I would put it in a resume. So the answer is, and I'm sorry to say it, it depends.
And with the job market, perhaps someone has made a complete pivot in the months before applying to business school, maybe an industry that's been letting people go. Rachel, facing that with honesty and again, underlying reasons for choice that you might have made, even though it might seem like a complete pivot.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm having some, as you can hear, some construction issues going on outside. So what I would quickly say is, find the reasons why behind why you made that pivot, and think about sort of explaining how that gets you further in, further along in terms of your dreams and your long-term goals.
Great.
Sorry.
So we'd love to find out your long-term goals. Please reach out. This is just one masterclass alongside so many other resources that this dream team at Fortuna have put together. We're delighted that you could have joined us for this deep dive into how to get into the Stanford GSB. And Maren, Rachel, as always, an incredible pleasure to spend this time with both of you. Thank you very, very much indeed.